Layla sat on the edge of the weathered wooden fence, her bare feet dangling above the sun-baked earth. The ranch stretched before her, a tapestry of golden grasses swaying gently in the wind, but her world was filled with silence. She watched as Silas, a tall figure in faded denim, moved with the grace of a man who had spent a lifetime working the land. His face, lined and weather-beaten, held stories of heartache and resilience, yet his eyes softened when they met hers. They shared a quiet understanding, built on unspoken words. She traced patterns in the dirt, while he tended to the horses nearby, each movement deliberate, echoing a bond that had yet to be formed. As the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the horizon, a soft rustle stirred the air, and Layla turned her head, sensing something almost magical, a whisper only she could hear. The dim light of the shack flickered like a dying ember, casting elongated shadows on the cracked walls. Layla clutched her worn doll, the threadbare fabric a faint reminder of comfort long lost. She pressed her ear to the cool wood of the door, straining to hear the muffled shouting outside, where a deal was being made. The raucous laughter and the low, menacing timbre of men's voices drifted in, overshadowing the quiet rustle of her brother's movements behind her. He stood there, too close, a flicker of something cold and calculating crossing his face as he exchanged glances with an unseen figure. In that moment, the world beyond the door felt impossibly vast and terrifying. The door creaked open, ushering in a wave of dust and chaos. Layla's brother stood framed in the entryway, a silhouette of betrayal. "This is it," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, echoing against the fragile walls of the shack. Layla's heart sank as she caught the gleam of gold coin in his outstretched palm. The transaction was almost mechanical, devoid of emotion, as if he were selling off an old tool rather than his sister. Layla's grip on her doll tightened, tears stinging her eyes as she looked into the face of her brother, searching for the kindness that once shone there. Instead, she found only stone. Outside, a rugged figure loomed in the sunlight, a man whose presence claimed the landscape like a mountain. Silas shifted uncomfortably, hands calloused from years of labor grazing the contours of his worn hat. He hadn't come to buy a child, yet there she stood, a slight girl with matted hair and wide, fearful eyes. He had intended to purchase cattle, not a living soul, but as the dealer's words twisted through the air, he felt an inexplicable pull toward Layla. There was a world behind her gaze, one that seemed to whisper secrets of pain and longing. Yet he remained tethered to his own reality, the weight of his life pressing heavily on his shoulders. Layla's world closed in on her, each beat of her heart echoing the growing numbness in her chest. She took a hesitant step back into the shadows as Silas approached, a looming figure too large for her fragile space. The sunlight filtered around him, casting him in an ethereal glow, yet all she felt was fear. The whispers of her brother's betrayal gnawed at her, drowning out the softness of the world around them. She braced for the unknown, clinging to her doll like a life raft in a stormy sea, wishing with every fiber of her being to disappear. Silas reached out, his fingers brushing against her arm, a moment of connection that was both startling and unwelcome. Her body recoiled instinctively, every muscle tensing as if expecting to be struck. He saw her flinch, and for a heartbeat he paused, confusion clouding his rugged features. He wasn't used to this, being met with fear rather than gratitude. He had thought he could save her, but there was nothing to save her from more than her immediate circumstances. It was a lifetime of scars that had formed a barrier between them. As he dropped his hand, he felt an unshakable distance stretching between them, more vast than the open plains he called home. "Is she deaf?" Silas asked, unable to mask the uncertainty in his voice as he turned back toward the dealer. The man grinned, a glint of malice dancing in his eyes, as if Layla's silence was just another asset in a sordid game. "Can't hear a thing. Perfect for a rancher like you. No noise, no trouble," he replied, the words dripping with disdain. Lila's heart raced, the misunderstanding hanging in the air like a heavy mist. She could hear whispers in her mind, echoes of her mother's laughter and the sweet sound of birds, but at that moment, all that registered was the finality of leaving the only home she had known. With the transaction concluded, Lila stood vulnerable at the threshold of her new life, the oppressive weight of her reality settling into her bones. Silas led her away from the shack, the vibrant colors of the open world blurring into an indistinct canvas. She felt lost within the expanse of the ranch, a place teeming with untamed beauty, yet devoid of warmth. The rolling hills mocked her, their allure overshadowed by the void of separation. She could not fathom the life ahead. Only shadows of anguish and uncertainty danced in her mind. As they rode in silence on the truck towards his ranch, Lila pressed her face against the chill of the glass, watching the landscape shift outside like pages in a forgotten book. She was a mere spectator of her own fate, adrift in a sea of emotions too vast for her to comprehend. She worried she might ever hear the whisper of kindness again. As they crossed into the vast pastures, Silas cast a glance at her, a glimmer of shame flickering momentarily in his eyes. The wound of his decision would silently haunt him, a reminder of emotional distance that would stretch between them no matter how close they stood. Lila stepped off the dusty bus, the remnants of a long journey lingering in her bones. The sky above, a bruised shade of grey, threatened rain, wrapping the world in a muted hush. She clutched a frayed backpack, the only remnant of a life she had left behind, filled with tangled memories of betrayal and sorrow. As she gazed at the sprawling expanse of the ranch, a mix of fear and curiosity rose within her, setting her heart racing. The old timber barn loomed like a silent sentinel, the creaking boards whispering secrets that she couldn't quite connect with. Silas stood outside, his weathered hands resting against the fence, his gaze fixed on the new arrival. He was a man forged in the rugged landscape of the ranch, his life steeped in the scent of soil and sweat. His face bore the marks of time, etched with deep lines of hardship, yet his eyes held a flicker of warmth, a spark of hope that he seldom permitted to shine. Silas felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him as he observed Lila's hesitant steps, the way she instinctively pulled in on herself as if bracing against an unseen storm. Silas took a deep breath, the air heavy with the promise of rain, and pushed himself away from the fence. He ambled towards her, the gravel crunching beneath his boots, an echo of his solitary existence. Lila flinched slightly at the sound, a sudden instinctive reaction to the world around her that never paused for her silence. As he approached, Silas offered a nod, the same nod he had given to the land, the cattle, to the sun setting behind the mountains, an acknowledgement of her presence. "Welcome," he said, his voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder, filled with a gravity that seemed to penetrate the quiet. Lila's eyes met his, and in that moment they shared a fragment of understanding. His presence was solid, unwavering, yet she sensed a storm brewing beneath his surface, a man carrying burdens he seldom spoke of. Lila kept her silence, feeling the weight of words unsaid, like ghosts lingering just outside her reach. In the days that followed, the ranch's rhythm enveloped her, a stark contrast to the chaos she had escaped. The mornings rose slowly, shrouded in a mist that settled over the fields like a comforting quilt. Lila learned to wake before dawn, the world still cloaked in shadows. Silas moved with purpose, tending to the cattle, mending fences, always with an air of resolve. Lila fell into the routine, her hands learning the motions of labor, yet her heart remained a lingering question mark, searching for a connection that felt just out of grasp. Silas kept a respectful distance, well aware of the fragile wall Lila built around herself. He watched her struggle to communicate, her fingers trembling as she would gesture, the words caught somewhere between her mind and the world. Her silence was a stark contrast to the unyielding noise of ranch life, a reminder that some things could not be easily bridged. He often found himself studying her, intrigued by the way her eyes flickered with determination, defiance, and an unquenchable yearning for something unspoken. One afternoon, as grey clouds loomed overhead, Lila wandered to the edge of the property, where the land met the wild expanse of the forest. The trees stood tall, their branches swaying gently in the wind, whispering secrets in a language she could not hear. With each step, she felt an undeniable pull, an urge to let the solitude embrace her, to escape the ordered chaos of ranch life. She took to wandering freely, exploring hidden paths and forgotten creeks, seeking solace in the vibrant life surrounding her. Silas noticed her absence that day, an unsettling unease settling in his chest as he searched for her. He found her standing at the edge of the trees, her silhouette framed against the towering pines. He approached slowly, feeling the weight of each step, the crackling leaves underfoot a reminder of how delicate their connection remained. As he drew closer, he opened his mouth to speak, but something held him back. Instead, he reached deep within himself, tapping into the part of him that understood the silent language of the heart. And in that moment, as Lila turned to meet his gaze, something remarkable happened. A faint whisper carried on the wind, brushed against her ears, a sound soft and delicate like the caress of a long-lost melody. Her eyes widened, a glimmer of recognition flashing within them, and for the first time it felt as if the world was beginning to reach back to her, unfolding the layers of silence that had cocooned her existence. While the ranch remained quiet, a bond was subtly forming, one that transcended words and demanded to be felt, heard, and cherished between them. Silas rose before dawn, the rooster's early crow echoing across the vast expanse of his ranch. He moved with the familiarity of years spent caring for the land, the sturdy boots that had creased at the ankles, the worn denim that clung to his frame, and the weathered hands that had shaped this place into a haven. Lila's presence revived a sense of purpose within him that he had thought faded. Each morning she was already awake in the kitchen, the faint aroma of coffee and cornbread hanging in the air like a lingering promise. Lila had quickly settled into a rhythm of chores. She watered the horses, her hands gentle as she brushed against their coats, communicating with them in a way Silas had never seen before. The animals responded to her silent touch, leaning into her, offering snippets of trust in a world that had often betrayed her. He watched, fascinated, as Lila built bonds that transcended words, yet every time he noticed her smile, a subtle pang of unease stirred within him, born from the nagging thought of how different their worlds truly were. Silas often found himself on the periphery, drawn to her yet unsure how to bridge the chasm that divided their lives. With every laugh shared over simple meals or stolen moments spent in the barn, a hidden tension simmered between them, threading through the fabric of their daily interactions. He could feel it when their eyes met, a fleeting connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had given her a fresh start, but that didn't mean he understood the complexity of her silence or the shadows that lingered behind her gaze. The vastness of the ranch echoed with secrets, and Lila was one of them. Despite their growing camaraderie, he often caught glimpses of an underlying sadness, an unshakable heaviness she couldn't shake off. As they worked side by side, he wanted to peel back those layers, to understand the depths of her heart and mind, but he sensed her hesitation, an instinctual retreat whenever he drew too close. His curiosity was a flame, and she was the moth, skirting the edges yet wary of the burn. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Silas found Lila by the old oak tree at the edge of the pasture. She sat with her legs crossed, tracing her fingers through the grass. Silas approached slowly, trying to read her expression. Her brow was furrowed, her lips pressed together in a thin line. He wanted to ask her what troubled her so deeply, but found himself at a loss for words, unsure of how to breach the silence that enveloped her. When he finally spoke, it felt clumsy, heavy. You can talk to me, if something's bothering you." The words landed like stones between them, and Lila's eyes shifted away, casting downward. He could see the tension ripple through her body as she grappled with his offer. He longed for her to open up, to share the burden she bore, yet he feared pushing her too far, breaking the fragile connection they had woven. Lila's fingers paused in the grass, her gaze flickering to Silas. In that moment, he saw a glimpse of vulnerability, a fleeting spark that ignited a warmth in his chest. She took a deep breath, eyes glistening with unspoken fears. For a heartbeat, he thought she might share her truth, the story that lay beneath the surface of her quiet life. But instead, she gathered the courage to stand and walked away, leaving Silas with a sense of longing that gnawed at him. Evenings fell into a steady rhythm of tasks and silence. The glow of the setting sun painted the sky in hues of crimson and gold, casting long shadows as they worked side by side, her presence a comforting yet elusive ghost. Silas was acutely aware of the distance she kept, the emotional wall she had built around herself. He wanted to breach it, to offer her a sense of safety, but the harder he tried, the more elusive she became. Yet, as days turned into weeks, those quiet moments together began to shift. They found a language in shared laughter, in moments of discovery, and in the care they offered one another. Despite the friction of unspoken words and hidden scars, a tenuous bond formed. Silas would catch her glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking, and sometimes a light would bloom in her eyes, as if in those moments she, too, began to see the possibility of something beyond what they had known. As the first stars twinkled against the darkening sky, Silas felt an undeniable urge to break through her silence. He wanted to be her confidant, to hold her secrets carefully between them. But for now, as they wove their lives together on the ranch, he could only hope that one day she might find the strength to share the whispers of her heart. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barn, where Silas worked absent-mindedly, a half-finished fence post in his hands. Lila watched him from a distance, her brow furrowed as she picked at the frayed edges of her overalls. The unfamiliar world of the ranch loomed all around her, vast and filled with sounds she could not hear, but she felt them vibrate through the ground, through the wooden structures, and through the very air that surrounded her. She felt isolated in the beauty of it all, a silent observer in a world that pulsed with life. Silas turned his back, his broad shoulders tense as he focused on the task at hand, the weight of the past still carrying its burden. He had taken in Lila with the hope of healing her and himself in the process. Yet, every time he caught her watching him, on the edge of some unformed thought, he felt a flicker of uncertainty deep within. Was he really capable of offering her the stability she so desperately needed? Would he be able to reach across the chasm of silence that defined her existence? That evening, Silas gathered the courage to talk to her. He approached Lila as she sat on the porch steps, her gaze lost in the horizon. "Lila," he said, unsure if his voice would break the invisible barrier. She turned, her eyes wide, reflecting the fading light of the day, and he knelt before her the way he would with a frightened animal. "I want to help you. I want you to trust me." Lila shifted back slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face as her fingers traced the weathered wood. She wanted to communicate, to break through the fog of their misunderstanding, but the words danced just out of reach. The silence wrapped around them both, thick and oppressive, and the tension in Silas's chest swelled. She thought of the murky images from her past, her mother's vacant eyes, the shadows lingering over their lives. Would this man become another ghost, another empty promise? Silas, feeling her reluctance, assumed her silence was a rejection. "I can't change your past, Lila," he continued, his voice growing softer, filled with a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to expose. "But I can help build a future, for both of us." He searched her face for understanding, but all he found was uncertainty staring back at him. In that moment, Lila's heart raced. She had come to the ranch seeking solace, yet felt trapped in an unrelenting storm of emotions. She clasped her hands tightly, struggling to articulate her thoughts in a way that made sense. Silas wanted to help her, but could she let him? Could she look beyond the fear that gripped her, the whispers of insecurity that nagged at her mind? Then, just as despair threatened to encase her, something inside Lila stirred. She reached out cautiously, the distance between them shrinking. Her fingers brushed against his knee, and Silas's breath caught in his throat, a flicker of hope igniting between them. For the first time, she could see beyond his weathered exterior. The pain etched into his features, the warmth and strength that emanated from him, like the light fading from the sky. With that simple touch, Lila felt a rush of connection, a whisper of understanding that passed between them, like a gentle breeze in a still room. Silas took a deep breath, and without knowing why, his heart pounded in rhythm with the moment. He felt her need to be understood, her desire to shed the weight of her past, and a flicker of something deeper ignited in the chasm between them. "Lila," he whispered, his voice barely above the rustle of the leaves. "I'm here." In that shared breath, vulnerability cracked open the walls around both their hearts. They didn't have the answers yet, but in the tangled uncertainty, they found a glimmer of hope, a fragile promise held in the silence of understanding. It was the beginning of their journey, two souls reaching through the darkness, seeking light in the bonds of trust. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the ranch in hues of orange and gold as Lila sat on the weathered wooden steps of the porch. Each board creaked under the weight of time and memories, just like the unspoken bond growing between her and Silas. She traced her fingers along the rough edges of the railing, a familiar sensation that grounded her as the cool breeze whispered through the fields, rustling the tall grass like a gentle lullaby. Lila had found solace in this place, a sanctuary that felt both foreign and oddly comforting. Silas emerged from the barn, dust clinging to his worn jeans, his hands rugged and calloused from years of toil. He had dedicated his life to this land, and now Lila was a part of it, though their connection was still shrouded in an unspoken barrier. As he walked towards her, the late afternoon sun outlined his figure, casting a shadow that stretched across the porch like an invitation. Lila sensed his presence before she could see him fully. It was in the way the air changed, thick with the promise of something unnameable. He knelt down beside her, picking up a stray tuft of grass that had found its way onto the porch. Silas held it between his fingers, inspecting it with a care that made Lila's heart flutter. It was such a small act, but in that moment, she understood something vital about him, that he sought beauty in the overlooked, the small and fragile things of life. She turned her gaze towards the horizon, where the golden light met the distant hills, wondering if he saw the same possibilities in her. Silas's eyes found hers, deep pools of understanding that made her breath hitch. He held up the piece of grass, an offering of sorts, and she smiled. The gesture was simple, yet full of meaning, a bridge constructed over the chasm of silence that had characterized her early days on the ranch. In that smile, Lila felt a flicker of warmth, an unspoken agreement that they were not so different after all. They both carried burdens, scars, etched into their lives that only they could truly understand. With a gentle movement, Silas reached out, brushing his thumb across her knuckles, a fleeting but electric touch. The world around them faded into a blur. The ranch, the sounds of the animals, and the rustle of the grass all melded into a soft hum. Lila's heart raced at the intimacy of that moment, the way his touch spoke louder than words ever could. She couldn't hear the whispers of the wind, but she felt their weight against her skin, as if nature herself was weaving a connection between them. In the silence that enveloped them, Lila felt something shift, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. She looked down at their entwined fingers, feeling the roughness of his skin against her softness. It was an anchor in a world that sometimes felt disjointed. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt seen, acknowledged in a way that transcended her silence. Lila grasped his hand gently, her fingers curling around his, as if to reassure him, and maybe even herself, that this moment was real. Silas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and in that smile, Lila saw a reflection of her own hope. They were both navigating uncharted waters, pushing through the doubt and fear to discover the potential for something beautiful. In the warmth of his presence, she felt a sense of belonging that had eluded her for so long. They were two souls drawn together by the quirks of fate, tethered by experiences too profound to articulate. Something in his demeanor shifted as he released her hand, a subtle acknowledgement of the connection they were forging. He turned his gaze back towards the sprawling fields, a quiet determination settling on his features. Lila followed his line of sight, and for a fleeting moment, they shared a vision of what could be. A partnership, a friendship forged through understanding and the silent language they were beginning to speak. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Lila felt an inexplicable lightness in her heart. In that shared moment of vulnerability and strength, she heard a whisper, an echo of hope and love threading through the air between them. She didn't need words to comprehend the promise held in that gaze, the uncharted territory they were willing to explore together. In the twilight of that day, the ranch was no longer just a refuge. It was the beginning of a new story, one that Lila and Silas would write together, hand in hand. A golden light spilled across the ranch, silhouetting the distant hills as Lila perched on the wooden fence, her fingers tracing the rough texture of the weathered wood. The world around her buzzed with life. Crows cawed overhead, a faint breeze rustled the grass, and Silas's voice resonated like a warm embrace, even if she couldn't comprehend the words. She drew in a breath, the earthy scent of the land filling her lungs. Each inhale carried with it the weight of her silence, a burden that both anchored and lifted her spirit. Days had turned into weeks, and each day she found solace in the rhythm of ranch life. Morning chores with Silas became a sanctuary, his presence a steady cadence in the silence she had known for so long. Yet beneath the surface of her growing comfort lay a burgeoning desire, a whisper of longing that gnawed at her heart, the yearning to speak. Lila watched the world unfold in vivid colors, yet felt like a bystander, a ghost haunting the edges of conversations, invisible yet desperate to be seen. Silas had made it clear, in his patient way, that the gift of words was not lost to her. They practiced together every evening, his hands guiding her through the shapes and sounds that felt foreign, yet tantalizingly close. She would watch his lips move, mirroring him in attempts to shape her own words. Yet every time she tried, the sound caught in her throat like a shy animal, unwilling to emerge from the shadows. Doubt clawed at her, whispering lies that echoed through her mind. What if she could never speak? One afternoon, a storm brewed on the horizon, painting the sky in deep grays. Silas, sensing her growing unrest, suggested they work on a new lesson, the fierce wind whipping around them as they sheltered under the old barn. Lila's heart raced with both excitement and dread as Silas demonstrated the word home, his voice firm yet gentle, his hands illustrating the warmth of belonging. She concentrated, the vibrations of his speech wrapping around her like a shroud. But when she opened her mouth, only silence spilled forth. Frustration surged within her, a torrent of emotion that felt like fire in her veins. She slammed her palms against the barn wall, startling Silas. Lila's breath hitched, a storm of yearning bubbling to the surface. She wanted to shout, to cry out that she existed, that she had a voice worth hearing. The weight of her silence pressed heavy on her chest, and tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Silas stepped closer, his expression soft with understanding. He reached out, placing his hand over hers on the wall. A flicker of strength ignited in her, and Lila focused on the rhythm of her heartbeat, the pulse of life that thrummed within her. She She squeezed her eyes shut, envisioning the sunlight filtering through the barn's wooden slats, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. In that moment, she summoned every ounce of courage she possessed and, with unwavering intention, shaped her mouth into a familiar form. Her heart raced as she opened her lips, the sound bursting forth like a dam breaking. "Home," she breathed, the word tumbling out like a long-lost melody. It was not just a sound, it was the essence of everything she had felt, every moment spent beside Silas and the land they nurtured together. The world shifted, time seemed to freeze, and for a fragile moment, she held her breath, waiting for the magic that might follow. Lila watched Silas's eyes widen, his expression transforming into one of disbelief. "Lila!" he exclaimed, his voice a rush of warmth. He stepped back, shock and joy mingling in his gaze. You spoke!" The words hung in the air, vibrant and alive, wrapping around her like an embrace. She could see the pride swirling within him, and in that moment, the weight of her silence began to lift. It was a breakthrough, a crack in the shell she had built around her heart, allowing sunlight to cascade in. A small laugh escaped her lips, a sound raw and unrefined, but filled with hope. The storm outside faded into a distant hum, replaced by the exhilaration of having crossed an invisible threshold. Lila felt alive, tethered to the earth yet soaring above the clouds. She could speak, she could share her heart, her dreams, her fears. This was just the beginning. She was no longer just a girl in silence. She was Lila, with a voice and a story. In that moment, she understood that her journey was only just beginning. The sunset bathed the ranch in a warm, golden hue, a stark contrast to the coldness that had lingered within Lila's heart for so long. Silas stood under the sprawling oak tree, his silhouette framed against the glowing horizon. The air was thick, heavy with unspoken words and unfulfilled promises. He had taught her to trust again, to find beauty in silence, yet the one thing she never thought she'd be able to offer him remained just beyond her reach: her voice. Lila gathered her courage, her breath hitching as she stepped closer to Silas, her hands trembling at her side. She watched him, his brow furrowed in concentration as he examined the horizon. He had become more than just a savior. He was a steadfast presence, a beacon in her otherwise turbulent world. Each day he'd held her hand through her fears, guiding her with gentle prompts. Yet now, as she took those tentative steps forward, their closeness felt different, almost electrifying, as if every surface sparkled with the secrets they had shared. In the cool evening breeze, she could hear the distant calls of the night creatures beginning their symphony. The sound was familiar, reassuring, but it paled in comparison to the roar of emotions swirling within her. Silas turned, catching her eye, and she felt a connection surge between them, one that transcended words. It was a palpable energy, charged and filled with meaning, one that could only be understood beyond the confines of spoken language. Yet she longed to break through that barrier, to utter the name that had danced on her lips for so long, held captive in anguish and anticipation. Silas approached, concern etching his features as he studied her. In his gaze, there was a blend of warmth and a hint of worry, as if he could sense the storm brewing within her. He didn't rush her. His patience was a sanctuary. Every time they shared a moment, he made her feel heard in ways she never thought possible. She breathed deeply, wanting to let him know the depths of her affection, the gratitude that filled her heart infinitely. "Lila," he said softly, his voice a soothing balm against her uncertainty. He stepped closer, his hands reaching for her shoulders. She leaned into his touch, longing for the comfort of his presence. But even with his warmth enveloping her, the weight of silence loomed heavier than ever. In that breathless moment, she could see the flicker of hope in his eyes, ignited by the love they had cultivated amidst their struggles. It was then she realized The time for silence was drawing to a close. She pressed her palms against her chest, feeling the rapid rhythm of her heartbeat, each thump resonating like a drum echoing through the vast spaces of the ranch. Lila closed her eyes, summoning the strength that had been buried under layers of fear and doubt. She could picture the life she wanted with him, the quiet mornings, the shared laughter, the way he had shown her the world beyond pain. She concentrated on that image, allowing it to guide her, her spirit soaring with each thought of him. "Silas," she whispered, her breath barely touching the air between them. It felt foreign yet liberating, a spark igniting the embers of her heart. But it was only a wisp, a fragment of her desire, and she knew it. She opened her eyes, locking onto his, her determination solidifying. She drew another deep breath, gathering the remnants of courage that had propelled her forward all this time. "Silas," she said, her voice breaking through the constraints of her silence like a dam finally giving way. The name spilled out, rough yet beautifully raw, reverberating between them. In that moment, everything crystallized, the struggles, the moments of despair, the nights filled with longing. For in that single utterance, she had reclaimed a piece of herself, a piece that belonged to him. Silas's eyes widened, shimmering with disbelief and an overwhelming joy as he stepped back, his hands covering his mouth in pure astonishment. Tears streamed down Lila's cheeks, and she felt lighter than she had ever been. The weight of her silence had shattered, leaving only the echo of his name, a melody of love and acceptance. Silas reached for her, enveloping her in his arms, the world dissolving around them. In that embrace, amidst the whispers of dusk, they found a new beginning, a promise blooming between them that was louder than any silence they had endured. Under the expanse of a twilight sky, Lila sat on the wooden fence, her small fingers tracing the rough grain, the fading light casting soft shadows around her. Silas stood beside her, the weight of years etched in his weathered face, yet his eyes held a warmth that felt like home. A gentle breeze swept through the ranch, carrying the scent of wildflowers and earth, weaving around them a tapestry of unspoken understanding. Lila closed her eyes, letting the whisper of nature fill the silence. She turned her head slightly, and in that moment, the world shifted. She felt a vibration, a pulse in the air that danced between them. Silas reached out, his hand brushing against her shoulder, grounding her in this sacred space they shared. With a deep breath, Lila lifted her gaze to the horizon, where the sun dipped below the hills, splashing the sky in hues of orange and lavender. In that fleeting stillness, she raised her hand, fingers fluttering like the wings of a butterfly. Silas mirrored her motion, their hands creating a bridge of connection, an unspoken promise that echoed louder than any words. As darkness settled, they remained side by side, the silence rich with the whispers of a new beginning.